after your time with the BBC in Beirut, they posted you to Washington. Could you walk me through that? I know that it was was that a 6-year period?
It was almost a 10-year period.
Almost 10 years. Okay. So I'd like
Yeah.
to know
And it's
first,
also,
before we discuss the work itself, how did it feel for you to be living away from Lebanon? You'd never lived away from Lebanon, and to go to Washington, and it's a very different lifestyle, very different pace of life, career, very different pace of career even. What was that like?
so I really wanted to go to Tehran, and I didn't get that job. And as a compensation, the BBC decided to give me the opportunity to go to New York for 3 months to cover in between two correspondents who were not going to overlap. So there was a 3 months gap, and they asked whether I want to go to New York, and I said, "Yeah, sure, sounds great." So that was a great relief. I was still getting over the whole roller coaster of 2005, 2006 in Lebanon with a wave of assassinations and violence and the war, etc. So it was great to leave Lebanon. New York wasn't quite my kind of story because unfortunately I don't do light fun stories. I don't do culture. I do some, but I don't do finance. So it was a little bit hard to find my footing, but I was just enjoying it as much as I could. And I did great during 3 months. And the BBC realized that I had a lot to offer beyond Lebanon. And I realized that I had a lot to offer beyond the Middle East as well. And that I could do it. And that I didn't only have to apply to, Amman, Baghdad, Riyadh, or Tehran.
Did that surprise
And
you?
so
Did that
it
surprise
didn't
you that
surprise me. It didn't surprise me, but it sort of opened my eyes to other possibilities that I hadn't contemplated yet. Because for me, it's always about where can I make a difference? And America is not my country, so I just wasn't quite sure how I could make a difference
Yeah.
covering America.
Hmm.
But when the State Department job came up in the US that year, um, I was asked whether I wanted to apply for it. And it made total sense because I'd grown up on the receiving end of American foreign policy all my life. And now I could go cover that policy being made. So I applied and I got it. And that was an incredible move for me. And I'll never forget one of the BBC bosses who was on the board for the interview for the Tehran job. She was the deciding vote against me getting the job. And when I had applied for the State Department job, I was in London for the interviews, and she pulled me aside and she said, "Look, I want to tell you something. I'm very sorry you didn't get the Tehran job because, it's actually because of me. I was the deciding vote against you. It was 50-50, and then I weighed against you. I didn't want to send a woman into what was going to possibly be a war zone because things were very tense at the time and there was talk of a war." And I thought, are you kidding me? I grew up in a war. I covered war. Why would you make that decision for me? But you know what I told her? I said, "Oh, don't worry, one door closes and another one opens. And I think I'm on my way to Washington, which is exactly where I'm meant to be right now." So I never look back. And I always think if one door closes, another one
Yeah.
will open.
Yeah.
And you asked me whether, it was a change of pace and how I adapted. Going to the US in many ways felt like going home. I felt very comfortable in the US. My sister had studied in the US. I'd visited many times. I spoke English. America is so accessible to anyone around the world. It wasn't a culture shock for me coming from Lebanon. We have a lot of, cultural references that are American. It really felt like going home. In fact, I felt the culture shock in reverse. I thought Washington, D.C. was so quiet, so provincial. Beirut is a happening, buzzing place where people are spilling out of bars at 3 in the morning. There's cultures. My friends are architects, designers, restaurant owners, chefs, flower shop, growers, etc., etc. And I just thought Washington was so boring. It was just a policy town. But I put my mind to it and I said, this is what I'm here to do and I'm going to do it. And I did, I think I did well. I
Mm.
had a great time and I made a difference as well there because I came to it in a way that no other BBC State Department correspondent had come to this job before. They'd all been British before me, and I came with a, you know, I'm half Western because I'm half Dutch, but I came to it with a sort of a non-Western perspective, asking questions that no one had asked before. And I think that's why I eventually developed such a rapport with Hillary Clinton, because I kept asking questions that were different, that were, came from a different perspective, from a different angle. And that's why I ended up writing my book, The Secretary, because I found in my travels with the US, with the US Secretary of State around the world, when we went to Pakistan or we went to, Cairo or Tunisia or Baghdad or Kenya, etc., that a lot of people still had the same questions that I'd had as a child. What can America do for us? What does it mean that the Secretary of State is here? Why doesn't America do this? Why doesn't America do that? And so I had a better understanding now of why. And I set out to write that book for an American audience to better understand what American foreign policy means for others, and how their country is viewed in the rest of the world, but also for readers around the world to better understand how American policy is made and what it can do and what it cannot do.
I read the book, and one of the things it was such a whirlwind of, scheduling and traveling and planes, and it was as if, you had no time to breathe. Did you write that while you were a correspondent, or did you write that afterwards? Did you write it on the job, so to speak?
I started working on this in end of 2010. So 2 years before Hillary Clinton, so 2 years into Clinton's tenure. And it came out at the month that she left the State Department.
And did you keep a diary all those times whenever you were traveling? Were you keeping records of things? I mean, it's a very detailed, it feels like the pace of a diary a little bit. Did you record as you were going? Your thoughts, your notes?
Well, obviously I was recording as a journalist, but I wasn't taking notes for the book. I was taking notes for my job.
Yes.
And then I had to interview. It's not a diary because it's not just me. It's not my perspective.
Yes.
But I interviewed to reconstruct a lot of the scenes in the book. I had to interview a lot of the people around her and others, foreign ministers, etc., to reconstruct things, conversations she'd had and meetings she'd had and things like that. So it was both on the go and looking back and doing the reconstruction.
It's a fascinating book. It really is. It really gives you
TikTok.
It's fascinating because it really gives you a slice of life on the road in this sort of environment, which a lot of people.
And the inside look, an inside look at the foreign policy machine of America, which became completely irrelevant under Trump because he made policy through Twitter. And, with one or two other people. But now that we have the Biden administration back, you have systems in place and administration and protocol so the book in a way is relevant again, and it's very relevant again because a lot of the people who are in office today are actually in the book, including Jake Sullivan, who's the national security advisor and who was Clinton's deputy chief of staff.
I want to jump to Black Wave, which I know that you wrote after you left the BBC. You went back to live in Lebanon. I read somewhere it took you about 3 years to write. This book for me was one of the best books I've read in the last 5 years, if not more. And I strongly advise the listeners to pick up a copy. It's a bestseller. It describes the year 1979 as a turning point in the Middle East, and specifically how the breakdown in the relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia then made the region almost unravel to the situation we're in at the moment, and we have been for the last few decades. I want to talk to you about the book. I want to know, first of all, how you came up with this particular idea, what made you want to zoom in on the Iran-Saudi relationship? And I know that you begin the book in this with this question that I think every Arab asks themselves is, what happened to us? And why are we here? What happened to our region? And you ask that question, and then you proceed to
Yeah,
explain.
I try to answer it.
Yeah,
All answers are incomplete.
but
But
how did you
I
come
want
up with
to
the
back.
idea to begin with? How did you come up with this idea?
So I want to backtrack a little bit and tell you about how I was supposed to be writing a completely different book. And if this show is about pivot points and roads less traveled and turning points that you didn't expect, I was actually focused on writing something totally different about a Lebanese family who'd gone through, love, exile, assassination, etc. And I wanted to write their story as a way of telling the story of Lebanon and the Levant, but for various reasons, it didn't work out. And as I was researching that story, I was starting to think about this, this terrible unraveling of the Middle East, and talking to some friends in the US about it, and watching, the terrible damage that ISIS at the time in 2014 was doing to the region. And it sort of got me thinking about cultural desertification. And then I started, digging a little bit, and friends suggested I should write something about, Sunni Islam and whatever. And I just thought, no, it's really not my thing. But then that year, 2014, that Christmas, my sister who lives in Lebanon, my eldest sister who lives in Lebanon, Ingrid, traveled to southern Lebanon with a friend of hers who's from a village near Nabatieh, which today is a sort of, a power base for Hezbollah. And my friend's sister, rather, really wanted to show my sister around and show her her hometown and where she'd grown up. And, they were supposed to spend the day and have lunch. But when they got there, it's really only when you bring an outsider to your family or to your home or to your village that you see, all the warts in a way. And so this friend suddenly realized there was not much to show my sister. There were no cafes, the theaters were closed, there was not much shopping to be done. They couldn't really find a nice place for lunch, so they went to, another town a few miles away. And that got me thinking about the fact that we had been through a previous wave of cultural desertification, except it was not by, radical Sunni Salafists. It was by, revolutionary, Shiism exported by Khomeini. And, in writing my first book, The Secretary, I'd already come across a few incidents that were connected to 1979, the siege of the mosque in Mecca, the invasion of Afghanistan, history that I knew, but not in detail. And I started piecing things together, and I started wondering whether, ISIS was a reaction, whether Hezbollah was a reaction, and who was a reaction to which, and where did it start, and, what did it all begin in this year, 1979? And the more I dug, the more I thought, wow, I think I'm onto something. And the more, there was something about the ISIS summer that brought to the fore more and more of this questioning about what happened to us. Why are we seeing this happen in Iraq and in Syria, the cradle of civilization? And so bit by bit, I started, piecing things together and doing my research and really testing the thesis that 1979 was this turning point.
And how did you go about doing your research for that? Because how did you test the thesis?
In very different ways, interviews, readings, conversations with others who know more about the region, digging in libraries to see whether anything had been written about 1979 or in that way. the doubt that comes with writing is incessant, is never ending. And I doubted this book until it came out, or until some experts who read it to sort of help me with corrections and with accuracy, etc. People who are authorities in their own right on the Middle East, or on geopolitics, told me that I'd done an excellent job, and that's where I finally felt comfortable. But that means that you're a few months away from publication by then.
Sure.
So the
Yes.
doubt never
Never
stopped.
went. Yeah.
And I think that's part of the course with writing.
It's a fascinating book, Kim, and it's a really unusual take on the region, and a different way of thinking of the region.
Thank you.
What has been the reception? I know it's been very, very well received, and I know it's a bestseller. How has that changed you? Has it changed your life in any way? Or do you consider yourself now, is this a path you're going to go on? You're going to be write more? Are you looking to do that more? How has this changed you?
I'm waiting for the next pivot point, which will, I think, come to me without me even working, not without me even working for it, but it will come as a result of this, because the hard work that I've done has set other things in motion and in place, and something will appear on my path which I would probably not have thought of, that will make total sense once I do it, like moving to Washington and being the State Department
Exactly.
correspondent, which I'd never thought of before. It was the sort of natural progression. And I mean, the way it's changed me is it has really helped me. I'm not sure. I don't know if it's changed me. I think it has it's been an incredibly rewarding experience. It's been very humbling in many ways to see the reception that it's got. It's been fantastic to receive so many emails and messages from around the world, from people who told me I was their confinement companion, really from Dublin, from Belfast, from Milan, from Islamabad, from Cairo, from Sao Paulo. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah.
People from the region who tell me that they're so grateful to finally read a book that helps them make sense of it all. People from the US or Europe who say, we never quite understood this region, but now we do. Thank you for writing this. We had our aha moment.
Yeah.
It's incredibly humbling that people in Washington, inside the administration, inside Congress, inside, the Pentagon, are reading the book. And I
Yeah.
hope it helps shape better policymaking.
Yeah.
I don't want to be full of myself, but I'm hopeful that it helps shed some light, a different light on this region. That's what every writer hopes.
Yeah. Well,
That they can
Kim,
make a difference.
that's great.
Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. That's not why you write the book, but that's always the hope. And I do hope that it helps some people better understand the region.
Well, it's a wonderful book. I recommend it highly. I want to just close by mentioning one thing that you have on your bio on your website. You talk about your love of food and cooking, and how one of your lifelong goals is to open a restaurant. Is that on the cards? Is that something you're still dreaming of?
No, I think the pandemic killed that, along with thousands of restaurants, if not millions of restaurants around the world. God, the restaurant industry is a hard industry. It's sort of this fantasy, which I don't think I'll ever get to. Maybe a cafe, bookshop. I don't know. I don't know what the world will look like in 5, 10 years.
Sure.
In the meantime, I love to cook for my friends. I try to do it as often as possible. I take them on travels with Indian cooking, Iranian cooking, French cooking, Thai cooking. I love to experiment and explore. So I think I'll stick to that for now.